I'm a ranger in Yosemite National Park, and before I tell you anything else, I need you to understand one thing. The list of rules they gave me on my first day wasn't a joke. It wasn't some hazing ritual. It wasn't one of those quirky employee manuals companies make to seem interesting. The rules existed because people had died, and not in the normal ways people die in a national park. Not from falls, not from bears, not from exposure. Something else. Something the Park Service never discusses publicly. I didn't believe that when I started. I do now. The list was handed to me during orientation by a man named Collins. He'd worked Yosemite for nearly 30 years. Quiet guy, gray beard, permanent bags under his eyes. The kind of man who looked like he hadn't slept properly in a decade. He slid a single laminated sheet across the desk. There were 12 rules. No explanation. No context. Just rules. I remember laughing. Collins didn't. Instead, he looked me directly in the eyes. Read them. So I did. Most seemed strange. A few seemed ridiculous. Rule 1. Never remain on an unmarked trail after sunset. Rule 2. If you hear someone calling your name from the tree line, do not answer. Rule 3. If wildlife becomes completely silent, leave immediately. Rule 4. Never investigate a second campfire. Rule 5. Ignore any ranger you don't personally know after dark. Rule 6. If you find shoes arranged beside a trail, turn around. Rule 7. Never look directly into Mirror Lake after midnight. The rest only got stranger. I remember finishing the list and asking the obvious question. What happens if someone breaks them? Colin stared at me for several seconds. Then he said something I'll never forget. They become paperwork. That was it. No smile. No explanation. Just paperwork. At the time, I thought he was trying to scare the new guy. I wish that had been true. For my first few months, nothing happened. The job was exactly what you'd expect. Missing hikers, lost tourists, medical emergencies, occasional rescues, long hours, beautiful scenery, normal ranger stuff. The rules slowly became background noise. Something nobody talked about. Something everyone followed anyway. Even experienced rangers. Especially experienced rangers. I noticed that. Veterans treated the list seriously, the same way people treat landmines. They didn't discuss it. They simply avoided stepping on them. That should have told me enough. But I was young, and curiosity is a dangerous thing in places like Yosemite. The first time I saw something truly strange happen during a search operation, a father had reported his teenage son missing. The kid wandered off during a hike. Nothing unusual. It happened all the time. We organized a search grid and headed into the forest. About 3 hours into the search, my partner stopped suddenly. His name was Wade, 10 years in the Park Service. Good ranger, good instincts. Without saying a word, he raised his hand. The entire team froze. I remember looking around. Everything seemed normal. Then I noticed it. The silence. No birds. No insects. No wind. Nothing. The forest felt dead. Wade immediately turned around. No. That was all he said. No explanation. No discussion. The entire team followed him back. The search was suspended for the rest of the day. I was furious. A kid was missing. We had daylight left. Why were we leaving? Back at headquarters, I demanded answers. Wade simply pointed toward Rule 3. If wildlife becomes completely silent, leave immediately. I thought it was insane. Then the missing boy returned on his own the following morning. Barefoot, covered in scratches, unable to explain where he'd been. He kept repeating one sentence, over and over. There were people between the trees. The kid refused to elaborate. His parents eventually took him home. Case closed. Officially. Unofficially, every ranger who heard his statement looked uncomfortable. Like they'd heard it before. Because they had. I discovered that months later. There were dozens of reports. Decades worth. Missing people returning with identical descriptions. People between the trees. Watching. Waiting. Always just beyond sight. Always smiling. The reports went back nearly 50 years. Most were buried in archived files. I probably should have stopped digging then. Instead, I became obsessed. Because once you notice the pattern, you start seeing it everywhere. Every strange incident connected back to the rules. Every disappearance. Every unexplained death. Every missing ranger. The rules weren't random. They were reactions, safety measures, warnings, and whatever they were warning us about was still out there. The event that changed everything happened during my second year. A couple reported seeing an illegal campsite near the northern wilderness boundary. Nothing unusual. People camp where they shouldn't all the time. I volunteered to investigate. Big mistake. The coordinates led me several miles off the main trails. Remote territory. Few visitors. Heavy forest. By the time I arrived, the sun was already setting. I found a campsite exactly where described. Only there was something wrong. 2 campfires. Not 1. 2. About 20 yards apart. Both burning. Neither attended. I immediately remembered Rule 4. Never investigate a second campfire. For the first time, the rule felt absurdly specific. Because that's exactly what I was looking at. One fire appeared normal. The other sat farther back among the trees. Partially hidden. Almost inviting attention. Every instinct told me to check it. Instead, I started backing away. Then I heard a voice. My voice. Calling from the direction of the second fire. Hey! I froze. The voice sounded perfect. Identical. Like a recording. Then it called again. Help me. My blood turned cold. Because I was completely alone. And the voice was definitely mine. To be continued. The voice came again. Closer this time. Help me. Same tone. Same accent. Same breathing pattern. It sounded exactly like I would sound if I were standing 20 feet away, calling for assistance. For a moment, my brain tried to rationalize it. An echo. A prank. Another ranger. Anything. Then the voice laughed. I didn't, but it did. A short, nervous laugh that sounded exactly like one of mine. That's when I turned around and started walking away. Not running. Walking. Every ranger learns that panic gets people killed in the wilderness. So I walked. Steady pace. Eyes forward. The voice followed. Wait. A few seconds later. You forgot something. Then. Turn around. Each sentence came from a slightly different location. Like whatever was speaking couldn't decide where it wanted to stand. I never looked back. Eventually the voice stopped. The silence that followed felt worse. The forest remained unnaturally still. No birds. No insects. Nothing. When I finally reached the service road, sound returned all at once. Wind. Leaves. Distant birds. My radio crackled. Normal again. The transition happened, so suddenly it felt like crossing an invisible wall. Back at headquarters, I filed my report. I left out the voice. Nobody asked why. That bothered me. A lot. Because when I mentioned the second campfire, nobody seemed surprised. Not even slightly. Wade simply nodded. Collins looked down at his coffee. The conversation moved on. Like we discussed weather. That was the first time I realized something important. The senior rangers already knew. Whatever was happening out, there wasn't a mystery to them. It was routine. And that terrified me far more than the voice. A few weeks later, I started noticing something else. The old-timers never worked alone after sunset. Ever. Schedules were adjusted around it. Patrol routes changed around it. Entire sections of the park became effectively abandoned after dark. Officially, nothing unusual was happening. Unofficially, everybody knew. The wilderness belonged to something else at night. Nobody said that out loud, but you could feel it. One evening I asked Collins directly, "What exactly are the rules protecting us from?" He stared at me for a long time. Then he asked a strange question. "Have you ever seen somebody twice?" I frowned. "What? In the woods?" I laughed. "No." Collins didn't. His expression remained completely serious. Then he stood up and left. That was the entire conversation. At the time I thought he was losing his mind. A month later I understood exactly what he meant. The call came in shortly after midnight. Lost hiker. Male. 32. Separated from friends. GPS coordinates received. Standard rescue operation. I partnered with Wade and another ranger named Martinez. The coordinates placed the hiker near an old trail system that hadn't been maintained in years. By the time we arrived, fog covered everything. Visibility was terrible. We spread out. Not far, just enough to search effectively. About 20 minutes into the operation, I spotted someone standing between the trees. Flashlight, uniform, ranger hat. I immediately relaxed. Another search team member. Then I realized something. The figure looked exactly like Wade. Same build, Same beard, same posture, everything, except Wade was standing beside me. I looked back toward my partner. He was still there. Then I looked at the figure again. Gone. Vanished. Like it had never existed. I didn't say anything. Not immediately. But apparently I wasn't subtle enough. Because Wade noticed my expression. "What did you see?" I hesitated. Then I told him. His face immediately drained of color. Not fear. Recognition. The kind of reaction someone has when hearing bad news they expected. He slowly nodded. Then pointed toward Rule 5. Ignore any ranger you don't personally know after dark. For several seconds, I couldn't speak. Because I suddenly understood something. The rule wasn't warning us about strangers. It was warning us about copies. And that meant somebody had seen them before. Many times. The lost hiker was eventually found. Alive. Shivering. Terrified. As we escorted him back toward the trailhead, he kept looking behind us. Finally, he asked a question. A question none of us wanted to hear. "Why are there two of you?" Nobody answered. The hiker looked directly at Wade, then pointed into the darkness. "That ranger's been following us for 20 minutes. Martinez immediately grabbed the man's arm and accelerated our pace. Nobody looked back. Nobody. Not once. The next morning, I checked search reports dating back decades. There were references everywhere. Not direct references. Subtle ones. Witnesses seeing duplicate hikers. Duplicate rangers. Duplicate family members. People reporting loved ones standing silently among the trees. Watching. Never approaching. Never speaking. Just observing. The reports always increased near certain areas. Areas marked on maps with small handwritten symbols. Symbols that never appeared on official park documents. I eventually discovered who had drawn them. Collins. Over 30 years, he had marked every sighting, every strange encounter, every disappearance. When I overlaid the symbols onto a modern map, a pattern emerged. The locations formed a rough circle, nearly 10 miles across, and directly at the center sat an area with no recorded trails. No campsites, no maintenance routes, nothing, just empty forest. Or at least that's what the official maps claimed. The unofficial maps showed something different. A blank space, a place nobody entered, not even search teams. The center of the circle. I became obsessed with it. That obsession nearly got me killed, because a few months later someone disappeared there. Not a tourist, not a hiker, a ranger. Martinez. One moment, he was conducting a routine patrol. The next, he was gone. His vehicle remained parked beside the trail. His radio remained inside. His lunch remained untouched. Martinez simply vanished. The investigation lasted weeks. Nothing was found. No tracks. No body. No evidence. Then strange things started happening. Rangers began receiving radio calls from him. At first, everyone assumed interference. Faulty equipment. Pranks. Until the recordings started coming in. The voice was Martinez. Without question, he sounded calm, normal, like he was standing beside us. The problem was what he was saying, because according to Martinez, he wasn't missing. We were, and every transmission ended the same way. "You need to stop looking." Then silence. The calls always originated from inside the circle, the area nobody entered, the area at the center of Collins' map. And one night, after hearing one of those transmissions, Collins finally told me the truth, or at least part of it. He looked older than usual, exhausted, defeated, like a man carrying something too heavy for too long. Then he said 4 words. "There aren't disappearances." I stared at him. "What? There aren't disappearances." His eyes met mine. There are exchanges. And for the first time since joining Yosemite National Park, I realized the rules weren't designed to keep us safe. They were designed to keep something contained. And judging by the number of missing people over the years, the containment wasn't working anymore. The word stayed with me for days. Exchanges, not disappearances. Exchanges. The more I thought about it, the worse everything became. Because if Collins was right, then the people who vanished weren't simply getting lost. They were being replaced. And suddenly dozens of strange reports started making sense. People returning after being missing for days. People who looked normal, sounded normal, acted normal, but somehow weren't. I went back through old files. This time I wasn't looking for missing persons. I was looking for returnees. People who came back. The results were disturbing. Far too many cases shared identical details. Subjects returned with no memory of where they'd been. Subjects claimed only a few hours had passed. Subjects displayed subtle behavioral changes. Changes family members noticed immediately. One wife reported her husband no longer recognized their dog. Another reported her daughter suddenly writing with the opposite hand. A father insisted his son had developed an entirely different laugh. Small things, easy to dismiss, until you saw them repeated hundreds of times. One report bothered me more than the others. A missing hiker disappeared for 4 days. Returned healthy. Normal. Case closed. 3 months later, his wife reported waking up during the night. Her husband was standing beside the bed, watching her, not moving, just staring. When she asked what he was doing, he replied, "I'm practicing." The report ended there. No follow-up, no explanation, just a single sentence. "I'm practicing." The kind of sentence that feels harmless until you think about it too long. Then it becomes terrifying. Around this time, I started noticing changes in Yosemite itself. Things that didn't belong. Trails appearing where none existed before. Old trails disappearing entirely. Landmarks shifting. At first I blamed faulty memory, until other rangers started noticing too. One morning, an entire footbridge vanished. A bridge that had existed for decades. Maintenance records proved it. Photographs proved it. Yet the bridge itself was gone. Not destroyed. Not damaged. Gone. Like it had never been built. Visitors complained. Staff argued. Nobody could explain it. 3 weeks later, the bridge returned. Exactly where it had been. Exactly as before. Nobody spoke about it afterward. Nobody wanted to, because acknowledging it meant accepting something impossible. Reality itself wasn't stable anymore. At least not near the circle. The center of Colin's map became the focus of everything. Every strange report, every missing person, every radio transmission, everything pointed there. Eventually, I asked Collins the question I'd been avoiding. What's in the center? For a long time, he didn't answer. Then he opened a locked cabinet. Inside sat a stack of folders. Old, yellowed, some nearly falling apart. The oldest dated back to 1954. Collins placed them on the table. I spent 6 hours reading. By the time I finished, my hands were shaking. Because every few years, somebody made the same mistake. They investigated the center. Scientists, researchers, search teams, federal agencies, military personnel. Everyone arrived with equipment. Everyone arrived with confidence. Nobody came back with answers. Most didn't come back at all. One report stood out. A survey team entered the circle carrying cameras, GPS equipment, radios, and enough supplies for 2 weeks. They disappeared for 4 days. Then every radio activated simultaneously. The recording still existed. I listened to it. Worst mistake of my life. The transmission began with static. Then voices. Hundreds of voices. All speaking at once. Male, female, adult, child. Overlapping. Contradicting. Arguing. Crying. Laughing. The sound was unbearable. Then suddenly everything stopped. Silence. And one voice spoke. A single voice. Calm. Friendly. Human. The voice asked, "Which version would you like?" The transmission ended immediately afterward. None of the survey team were ever found. Officially. Unofficially, 3 members returned 6 months later, walking out of the forest. Unaged. Unharmed. Wrong. Every witness described them the same way. Wrong. Nobody could explain what that meant. Yet everybody used the same word. Wrong. The returnees disappeared again within weeks. Nobody knows where they went. Or maybe somebody does. Maybe Collins knew. Because after I finished reading, he finally told me something he'd kept secret for 30 years. The center wasn't empty. There was a structure there. A massive structure. Older than the park. Older than settlement. Possibly older than recorded history. Nobody knew who built it. Nobody knew why. The few descriptions that existed were inconsistent. Every witness described something different. A tower. A tunnel. A city. A staircase. A doorway. The details changed. Only one thing remained consistent. Everyone who entered claimed the structure wasn't built for humans. Then came the radio call. The one that changed everything. It happened during a storm. Heavy rain, lightning, visibility almost zero. Dispatch received an emergency signal. Origin point, center of the circle. The signal belonged to Martinez, the ranger who vanished. The entire operations room froze. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. Then the transmission began. Can anybody hear me? Martinez. Definitely Martinez. Exactly his voice. Exactly his tone. Relief flooded the room. For about 3 seconds. Then he continued. I found the door. Silence. Static. Then, it wasn't locked. Nobody breathed. Martinez sounded terrified. More terrified than any recording I'd ever heard. Something crashed in the background. Metal. Heavy. Massive. Then Martinez whispered, "Oh God." A pause. Then, "They've been copying us." The transmission cut out for nearly 30 seconds. Then resumed. But it wasn't Martinez anymore. The voice still sounded like him. Yet something felt wrong. The rhythm. The emotion. The pacing. It was close. Almost perfect. Not quite. The new voice laughed softly. Then spoke. "We know you're listening." The exact same sentence from earlier incidents. The exact same sentence Daniel Mercer reportedly heard decades ago. The exact same sentence linked to countless disappearances. Every person in dispatch recognized it immediately. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. The voice continued. "You keep sending people." Static. "We keep sending people." Static again. Then one final sentence. A sentence I still hear in my nightmares. The numbers are almost equal. The transmission ended, and every radio in the building activated at once. Every single one. Hundreds of channels. Hundreds of frequencies. All broadcasting the same sound. Footsteps. Coming closer. Not through the forest. Not through the park. Through the radios themselves. Like something was walking toward us from the other side of the signal. The sound lasted 11 seconds. Then stopped. The next morning, Collins didn't show up for work. Neither did Wade. Neither answered calls. Neither responded to radio traffic. Their vehicles remained parked outside headquarters. Their offices remained untouched. Their coffee cups sat exactly where they'd left them. But both men were gone. No signs of struggle. No goodbye. Nothing. Only a single sheet of paper left on Collins' desk. A list. The same list every ranger received. Except this version contained a 13th rule. One that wasn't on mine. One nobody had ever shown me. Rule 13. If they learn your name, leave the park immediately. And at the bottom of the page, written in Collins' handwriting, were 6 words. They know all of yours now. That was 3 years ago. Officially, Collins retired. Officially, Wade transferred. Officially, Martinez remains missing. Officially, everything is normal. But I still work here. Or at least I think I do. That's another thing I'm not completely sure about anymore. Because sometimes I catch people looking at me strangely, like they're trying to figure something out. Sometimes visitors ask if I'm new, even though I've worked here for years. Sometimes old co-workers introduce themselves again, like we've never met. And lately I've started noticing gaps in my memory. Small ones, hours disappearing, conversations I don't remember having, places I don't remember visiting. Nothing major, nothing obvious, just enough to keep me awake at night. The worst part happened last week. I was cleaning out my locker. Normal shift. Normal day. Then I found a photograph. One I'd never seen before. The photo showed a group of rangers standing in front of a structure deep in the forest. A structure that looked different every time I glanced at it. Sometimes a tower. Sometimes a doorway. Sometimes something else entirely. Standing among the rangers was Collins, Wade, Martinez, and me. The problem is the photograph was dated 1986. I wasn't even born in 1986. Yet there I was, smiling, wearing my uniform, standing beside people who hadn't met me for decades. Written on the back of the photo was a single sentence. Just 4 words. A familiar sentence. One I've heard before. One I never wanted to hear again. We're sending someone back. And ever since finding that picture, my radio has started activating at exactly 2:17 every morning. No matter where I am. No matter whether it's powered on. No matter whether the battery is installed. The transmission is always the same. Static. Footsteps. Breathing. Then a voice. My voice. Asking one simple question. Do you remember leaving? The problem is, I don't remember arriving.